We continue with the book of Chronicles, Divrei Haymim, and we get to the 11th chapter. Yesterday we read about the death of Shaul, and as we said many times, this book is very much focused on the Davidic family, book that's going to extend, show how the Jewish community that has returned is connected to the Beit HaMikdash and how they're connected to the land and how they're coming back from the people that were there beforehand. And thus, so much of it about the King David and his family. And thus we're told, Vayikapsu chol Yisrael el David Chevrona le'mor hinei atzmecha uvisarcha anachnu. And they come to David in Chevron, and they said to him, we're your flesh and blood. Gam Tzmol, Gam Shilshom, Gam Biot Melech Ata Motzi V'Mevi Et Yisrael V'Yomar Adonai Elohecha Lecha Ata Tiret Ami Et Yisrael V'Ata Tiyeh Nagid Al Ami Yisrael. Even a long time ago, when Saul was still the king, you were the leader of Israel. And God even said to you, you will shepherd my people. You will be the ruler of Israel. Now, we know that, of course, back in chapter 14, the book of Shmuel, that the people are, that Shmuel tells that to David and tells it to presumably Yishai and David's brothers. But how would they know such a thing, that God has chosen David? It's not clear that David was somebody who spread this everywhere, who told people about it. But the way that it's described here, maybe it's just because of David's role as the general, etc. It's not clear, but a slight difference in terms of the story and how it's told. Vayavo chol ziknei Yisrael hamelech Chevrona vayichrot lahem David brit bechevron lefnei Adonai vayimshechu et David lemelech al Yisrael kedvar Adonai biad Shmuel. And so the elders came and made David king in Chevron, and he made a pact with them in Chevron, like the Russian chibur, like a connection, so a pact, or chaver, friends, and they anointed David king over Israel according to the word of God. Now, we have a little something that seems to be left out here, which is that David, it appears, the first 7 or so years of his reign are in Chevron or around Yerushalayim, but he's mostly king to the Jews in of Yehuda, and perhaps as well the tribe of Shimon, which sort of incorporated from the south into Yehuda. But there was another king we're not told about here, Ishbosheth. He was proclaimed king by Avner ben Ner, and Avner got upset about him, and there was a lot of drama that went down, and there were wars and unnecessary battles that went down. And David tried to stay out of the battles. He wanted to come to the kingship through peace. That's why eventually he moves his capital to Yerushalayim. But that seems to be not mentioned here, as if it didn't happen. Vayelech David v'chol Yisrael Yerushalayim hiyevus v'sham hayevusi yoshvei haaretz. So we skip forward from David being reigned to 7 years into his reign, when they go to the city of Yevus, where the Yevusim live. Vayomer yoshvei Yevus l'David lo tov alheinu vayelchad David emustat Zion ir David. And the people of Yevus said, you won't get in here. And David captures the stronghold of Zion, and it's now the city of David. And of course, we know different parts of Yerushalayim, different names. Ir David, one of the names. Zion, of course, a name of the book of one of the names of the of Yerushalayim. So here, right, we're told those names. Now, David does say to his warriors, we see in verse 6, David called Makei Yevusi B'Rishonai Yelarosh V'Lasar V'Al B'Rishonai Yoav Ben Tzruya V'Yilarosh. David there, back in that chapter, does sort of challenge them and get them to work well and to defeat the Yevusim, who are mocking and saying that they're not going to capture them. What we have here, which is not mentioned there, is that the person who leads the battle is Yoav Ben Tzruya. And it's as if Yoav Ben Tzruya at this point is made the chief. Now, in the book of Shmuel, Yoav ben Tzruya is already David's general. Yoav and his brothers Asael and Avishai, and especially Yoav is the general of the army. Yoav was from the get-go the general of the army. Yoav was the one who was fighting with Avner ben Ner. He may have had a little bit more control over the army as the general than David himself. But again, that's sort of skipped over. Yoav is from the tribe of Yehuda as well. And so we're trying to, again, as we've said, make the family of David and perhaps the entire tribe of Yehuda look a little better. We don't want to say this is our land and we fought each other over it, but we're going to leave that out. Vayeshev David b'mitzad al kein karu alu ir David. David occupied the the fort or the stronghold, and that's why it became known as the city of David. David fortified the surrounding city from the Milo all around, and Yoav rebuilt the rest of the city. David was getting greater and stronger, and God, the Lord of hosts, the Lord of the Tzavav, the army, was with him. And now we're going to tell a list of David's great warriors, demonstrating how great David was. If you remember back to the end of the book of Shmuel, and we'll talk about that sin is going to be in here when David does a counting of the Bnei Yisrael, wants to know how mighty he is, wants to know how great he is, wants to know how many soldiers he has, how many people are under his control. So it's not a very good thing, and it will be in Divrei Haymim as well. But here, this is not being written as by David asking for how important he is, how strong he is. This is, again, generations later, wanting to show you how great David is. Chazkim imo v'malchuto im kol Yisrael amlicho k'dvar Adonai al Yisrael. And these are David's great warriors who supported him in his kingdom, together with all of Israel, and made him king. Ve'elam mispar giburim shel David, Yashva'am ben Chakloni, Rosh Hashalishim, who orer et chanito al shlosh meot chalal b'pam achat. So the first one is mentioned is Yoshvi'im, and he managed to wield a spear against 300 and killed them all on one occasion. I believe that when we have the same thing mentioned in the book of Shmuel, it says that he killed 800, not 300, but here in our book it says 300. Okay, not a big difference. If you're writing in English characters, you can see why it might be an easy mistake to go from 300 to 800. Okay. And there are other slight discrepancies here, but nothing that's of great importance in terms of the names. And one of the other three great warriors was Elazar ben Dodo, who I am David befas damim v'plishtim nesfu sham l'milchama v'tichal katasadem le'as orim v'am nasu miplei plishtim. He was with David at Pas Damim when the Philistines gathered there for battle, and there was a plot of ground full of barley there, and the troops had fled from the Philistine. But they took their stand in the middle of the plot and defended and routed the Philistines and brought a great victory to Israel. So perhaps that was the time of Shaul, time of David. You wouldn't think that the men would run away. David was a great warrior. His kingdom was very, very strong. It was earlier when David was still more of a general. Three of the 30 chiefs went down to the rock to David at the cave of Adullam, while a force of Plishtim were encamped in the valley of Rephaim. Of course, we got Emek Rephaim, a neighborhood in Yerushalayim today. The David Az b'Mitzudah, and it seemed Plishtim Az b'Beit Lechem. David was in the stronghold, and the Philistines were at Bethlehem. Vayitav David ve'amar mi yashgeni mayim mibor Beit Lechem asher bashar. And David felt a craving. He needed to drink, and he said, if I could just get a drink from the cistern, which is by the gate of Bethlehem. And so the great warriors, they went through the Philistine camp and they drew water from the cistern, which was by the gate of Beit Lechem, and they brought it back to David, but David wouldn't drink it. It was such a great miracle. He thought, such great, it had to be God was with them. And so he used it, even though he wanted water, even though perhaps he needed water, he dedicated it to God, which is sort of expressive of who David was, always with God. He would make mistakes, but he was always God's chosen. He was always doing the things that God asked him. Vayomer Chalila li me'Elohai ma'asod zot hadam anashim ha'ela eshtem b'nafshotam ki b'nafshotam eviim v'lo aval ishtotam elasu shloshet hagibrim. He said, God forbid that I will drink this. Can I drink the blood of these men who risked their lives? Now they didn't die, but they risked their lives. They brought it at the risk of their lives, and David wouldn't drink it. And this was how great these three first warriors were. Now we continue with other warriors. Avishai achi Yoav, who haya rosh hashloshav, who orer et chanito al shlosh meot chalal, v'lo bashosha. Avishai, the brother, was the head of another three, a different band of three warriors, another group of musketeers or whatever. And he once wielded a spear against 300 and slew them. You want a name amongst the three? He was of that group of three. He was the most esteemed, and he was the head of that. However, he did not attain to the other three. The first three, the ones who went through the camp of the Philistines to Beit Lechem and got David the water. Those were the top of the top. This is the 1B. Not too bad. Now we have mentioned, we're in Pasuk Chaf Bet, verse 22, Benaiah ben Yehoyada, ben Ishchai, Rav Palim, bin Kav Se'el, hu ikat Shnei Ariel, Moav, hu yarad v'ikat Hari b'toch Habor b'yom Hashaleg. Now we have somebody named Benaiah ben Yehoyada. We do learn about Benaiah ben Yehoyada, but we learn him more as the executioner of Shlomo than one of the great warriors of David. And here it's described, what did he do? He was from the city of Kavazel, and he was a brave soldier, and he killed two sons of Ariel, perhaps two sons of a lion or Ariel of Moab. And on a snowy day, he went down into a pit and killed a lion. The Gemara talks about this and says that it's a reference to not to actual physical violence, but that it is a reference to him being a great Torah scholar. And there was a Torah scholar known as the Ben Ishchai, who Sfaradi from Iraq, I think, in the 18th century, and he named a lot of his books after things, Rav Pa'alim and Ishchayil, after some of the items here mentioned with Benaiah ben Yehoyada. Continue in verse 23, V'hu ikat ha'isha mitri asher midach hamesh ba'amal v'yad ha'mitri chanit k'minor or gim v'yeri alav b'shavet v'agzol ha'chanit miyad ha'mitri v'argeo b'chanito. He also killed a giant Egyptian who had a spear that was like a weaver's beam. I can't tell you, I don't know what a weaver's beam is, but Benaiah went down against him with a club, and he got the spear out of the man's hand, and he killed him with his own spear. Ela asu Benaiah ben Yehoyada v'lo shem b'shlosha giburim. These were the stories, the exploits of Benaiah, and he had a great name among those three warriors. Minash loshim hino nechbad hu v'lash losha lavo v'yisemu David al mishmato. He was highly regarded among the 10 groups of three, but he did not attain to the first three, to the top three. David put him in charge of his bodyguard, which may have led to him then becoming the one who goes and kills the people that Shlomo wants to be killed, back in the second chapter, I believe, or the third chapter of the book of Melachim. Continuing verse 26, where we have Asael, the third of the brothers of Yoav. He is actually killed before David becomes king in Yerushalayim. He's killed by Avner ben Ner. Avner says, I want to kill you. How can I sit next to your brother if we're going to have a peace conclave? He's a fellow general, and Asael is very fast and keeps following him. And he asks him not to, but he continues to follow. But here he's mentioned, and he fought for David, but while David was still only the king of Hebron, Yehuda, not when he was the king of all of Israel. But that's not, as we said here, mentioned here. Continuing in verse 27, Shamot HaHarori, Cheletz HaPloni, Ira ben Ikesh HaTkoi, Aviezer HaNototi. It's right, different names of his warriors: Sivchi HaChushti, Eli HaAchochi, Mahari HaNetofati. Right, it's mentioned where they're from. Cheleb ben Bana HaNetofati, two from Netofet. Iti ben Riv Migivat B'nei Binyamin, Benaiah HaPir Atoni. Churi, we're in verse 32, Menachel Gash, Aviel Ha'arvati, 33, Azmavet HaBacharumi, Elichava Hashal Avoni, those are Yeshivas Shalavim, Bnei Hashem HaGizoni, Yonatan ben Shega HaHarari. So, right, all the different places. Achiam ben Sachar HaHarari, Eliphaz ben Ur, Chefer HaMecherati, Achia HaPloni, Chetzro HaKarmali, Naari ben Azbai, Yoel Achi Natan. Is this the Natan who later is Natan Anavi? We don't know. Mivchar ben Hagiri, agree. Tzela Ka'amoni, Nachari Haberoti, Nosei Klei Yoav ben Sruya. And Yoav was so important that even his arms bearer is mentioned as one of the great warriors. Ira HaYitri, and we're reading the list for what's going to be mentioned in the next pasuk in 41, Mem Aleph. Garev HaYitri, so two people from Yitri. And then we have the most important name on the list, Uriah Hachiti, Zavad ben Achlai. And this is the strangest thing. You should remember Uriah. Uriah was, of course, the husband of Bathsheba. David slept with Uriah's wife. David then had Uriah killed. Here it's mentioned Uriah is one of the great warriors of David. And it's just like all the other warriors. Nothing else is mentioned. You would think they would scrub Uriah's name from the book, but it's not. Uriah is mentioned here as if nothing happened. He was just one of David's warriors. Not that he was sent on a kamikaze mission, that David wanted him killed. Not that David had slept with his wife. Not that David tried to get him to sleep with his wife, which is against Jewish law. when he called him back from the battlefield. It's shocking. It's like right. It's like having the movie Star Wars and leaving out that Darth Vader was Luke's father or something. You're leaving out the entire sort of plot line, the entire such a significant part of his life, and that's one of the things. Again, Divrei Haymim is a book that's going to be much more complementary to the Davidic dynasty. So we're leaving out all the battles with Ishbosheth. David just becomes king after Shaul dies, and the most heinous episode of David's life, which changes his life, and all things go downhill for a long time after that. The man who is killed, the man whose wife David sleeps with, is just mentioned as one of the great warriors of David. Continuing in verse 42, Adinah ben Shizah Haruveni, Rosh Ruveni, Velav Shloshim. So we mentioned somebody from the tribe of Reuven. Hanan ben Ma'achav Yoshafat Hamitni, excuse me. Uzziah Ha'ashtarati, Shama v'Yiel ben Chotam Ha'aro'eri, Yediel ben Shimri, V'yocha achiv hatitzi, Eliel hamachavim v'rivi v'yoshvia b'nei el Na'am, v'yitma hamoavi, Eliel v'ovid v'yaasiel hamitzo vaya. So here we have the names of many of David's warriors. Like we said, the account largely is the same. David was in Hebron, and the Jews came to him to appoint him. Some slight variations, only Yehuda there. It's not all of Israel. Doesn't get into some changes in terms of then later David moves to Yerushalayim, captures Yerushalayim, we call it Yerushalayim, Zion, Yer David, whatever we want to call it, from the Yevusi. And then the mention of his warriors with some slight differences, 300 killed versus 800 killed. And there's some names, if you want to look closely, you can look that some of the names are spelled incorrectly, but nothing serious. And really the most amazing thing in the chapter, like we said, is as if just this guy Uriah Hitti, he was just one of David's warriors, just like the rest of it. As if nothing happened that would be controversial during his life, that we would think he wouldn't be mentioned at